Hello, I'm Mark, and welcome to the final part of my Unreal Engine tutorial on how to build a data-driven time simulation component for your Unreal Engine games. So this is part 3, so let's do a quick little recap of what we did in parts 1 and 2. So first off, in part 1, we went ahead and defined all the data structures we need for our data-driven system. So we created some configuration structure, core time, which is going to house our raw seconds, as well as the data table and some implementation functions so that we can take that time and interpret it to however we want our clock set up. And then finally, we created a little utility struct which carries over our constants as well as calculations that we can use to calculate transform seconds into time elements like minutes, hours, and days. Okay, so then in part 2 we did a couple of things. First off, we went ahead and created our time simulation components. We created a little enumerator so that we can output that into a clock, and we'll use more of this in part 3. We added our properties, most notably our data table as well as our interpolation speed, so that we can define how quickly we want to simulate time within our environment. And then as well, we created all of our output variables. So first off, how we want to set things up. We created a couple of utility functions for generating time tokens and validating them off the raw time. And then some output functions, which we'll use more heavily in part 3, so that we can get that information out and display it the way we want it to, based on our time configuration. And then the second part of part 2 was creating a custom game instance, and we went ahead and created this instance so that we can give our simulation component global reach throughout the application. Okay, so now that we've got the quick little recap done, let's move on to part 3. So in part 3, let's go ahead and we're going to go ahead and create the display setup so that we can see our clocks ticking, and then we'll go ahead and configure them into the maps so that we can get it going, see what the output looks like, and then add our save and loading systems. So let's get started. So first off, let's go ahead and create our UI components. So to do that, I'm just going to come into the content drawer, and under here I'm just going to go ahead and create a folder. I'm just going to call it UI for UI elements. And within here, I'm just going to create another folder, and I'm going to call it time, which will have all of our time elements. Alright, so now that we've got that, let's go ahead and create our first UI component. And this is going to be, so we're going to come down here, right click, come to user interface, we're going to go to widget blueprint, and I'm just going to use a standard blueprint widget. I'm going to click on that. I'm going to go WBC, and I'm going to call this time clock. And let's go ahead and open that up. So I'm going to hit save. Alright, so let's go ahead and define our structure for our UI. So I'm going to set this to desired on screen, hit compile and save. And then first, let's go ahead and create our structure. So I'm going to say, I'm going to want a horizontal box first. So I want to create a horizontal layout. And then within the horizontal box, I'm going to say, I'm going to want a text. There it is. And I'm going to want a spacer. So there is our spacer. And then I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this and put that down there. So I'm just going to keep this as default. I'm not going to do anything special on the customization. So the first one is going to be for our label. So I'm going to click is variable over here. I can say txt label. And the spacer, I'm going to give that a size of 10 on the X, so we can put a little bit of padding between these two text blocks. And so I'm just going to go ahead and change this text to label. And then the second one, I'm just going to keep everything the same. The only difference here is I'm just going to come over to this little binding symbol beside the text block. I'm going to click on that, and we're going to say create binding. So what that's going to do is it's going to create a binding that will allow this to update on each tick. So we'll get back to this a little bit later, but there's our binding. So let's move over to the event graph and let's get things set up so that we can call our clock. So here, all I'm going to use is event construct. I'm going to pull over, actually first off I'm going to say get game instance, and then off the instance I should be able to cast to there is our game instance. So there we are. So this is the game instance. This is a blueprint of our game instance that we created, and we hooked into our into the engine so that it's using this versus the default. All right. So once we have that, I'm just going to go ahead and we have a good cast. I'm going to say promote to variable, and I'm just going to call this. Let's go ahead and just give this a quick rename. I'm going to call this game instance. Reference. And then off the game instance, I'm going to look for the get simulated clock. And I'm just going to go ahead and just convert this to a validated get within the blueprint. And then off here, I'm just going to then say promote. So if this is a valid, I'm just going to then get this clock, and it's set up here. And then the last thing I'm going to do on this, on the event construct, is go ahead and set the clocks label. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and create a function, so called create label, and this is just going to be a simple little void function. It's just going to call it, and we'll put all of our logic in here. And so I'm just going to come back to the event graph, create label, drag drop, and put it right in there. Save. Alright, so let's go ahead and define our label function first. So in our label function, we want to be able to come into our simulated clock. And nope, I don't want that. I want get. And I'm going to say, I'm going to do a validate. Actually, I'm just going to run this right off here. Is valid. And I want the macro version. So I'm just going to put that there. So I'm going to say first check to see if the clock's valid. Alright, so since I want to reuse this component for both the UTC and the local clock, I'm just going to go ahead and add an enumerator so we can set this. So I'm going to say is I'm going to say source, and let's go find our enumerator, which is there it is. So there's our chronometer source. I'm just going to hit save, and then I'm going to make this public and expose on spawn. So this can be set publicly by whatever is inheriting or using this this component. So now I'm going to just grab the source. I'm going to say get source. And then off here, I'm then going to say get clock name. There it is. And I'm just going to go ahead and put the source in. And then I'm just going to say here's our label, txt, get that. Let's say set the text, and we want the text, not the tooltip. And then I'm just going to go ahead and grab that and put that in there. And that should do it. Okay, so next let's go ahead and go into this get text, which is technically doing our display. And we're just going to do something similar. I'm just going to go ahead and just copy that. And I'm just going to paste this in here. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that this is valid. If it's not valid, then I'm just going to copy this, paste it, and put this down here. All right, so next, let's go ahead and get the output done. So I'm just going to go and extend this out a little bit so you can see what's going on. Okay, so pretty much all we're going to do is we're going to go into the simulation clock and say get. So we have days, hours, and minutes. So we can do that. So I'm just going to say get that. There's our days. Get simulated hours. And we'll say get simulated minutes. And we're just going to grab all of that. And then I'm just going to grab our source. I'm going to hit the get, and I'm just going to park that into there, there, and there. So now we've got all of that defined. All right, so now all we need to do is just bring this back and put it into a formatted string. So to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and drag off the text, and I'm going to say format text. And then let's go ahead and put our formatting in. So I'm going to say day, curly brackets D, and I'm going to put a pipe in between, and then I'm going to say curly brackets H, little h, put a space, put a colon, and then curly brackets M. Alright, so then that should generate the 4 elements, or the 3 elements that we want to populate. So after this, we could just go ahead and hook all these in, but I want to do some additional formatting of our information. So to do that, I'm just going to drag off here, and I'm going to say to text, and I'm going to say integer. So this will allow us, if we wanted to create any precision on those values, to do that here. So here we could come in here and we could say always sign, always use grouping, which is turned on, and then this gives us a minimum number of significant digits and a maximum number of significant digits. For days, I think 1, 2, 3 I think is good, but for hours and minutes, let's go ahead and update that. So to text integer, I'm just going to go and hook this into the hour. Going to expand on this, and I'm going to say 2 and 2. So the min-max is 2, and then I'm going to do the same thing for minutes. 2. There's our integer, and I'm just going to pop that in there, and we'll just say 2 and 2. So that should format those values for us. I'm going to hit save, hit save. Alright, so if this is invalid, it's going to be an empty string. Otherwise, if it's valid, we'll go ahead and bring out whatever. We'll go ahead, make our calculations, and output the days, the hours, and the minutes into our string. Okay, so that should do it for everything here. So let's go ahead and create the HUD which this thing is going to reside in. So to do that, I'm just going to come down to content drawer. I'm going to come back up to UI, and I'm going to right click, come down to user interface, widget blueprints. I'm just going to take a standard blueprint, WB HUD. And let's open this up. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a canvas panel. So I'm going to drag and drop the canvas panel in. And then off the canvas panel, since I want my clocks in a vertical stack, let's go ahead and get ourselves a vertical box. So here's our vertical box. I'm just going to park that in there. And all I need to now do is just say WBC. There's our time clock component. I'm just going to drag that in there. And then I'm going to say get me a spacer. So I'm going to add a little bit of spacing between the first clock and the second clock. And I will go on the y-axis this time. I'm going to say 5. And then I'm just going to click on this and say Control D, which will go and duplicate it. And I'm just going to put this down here. So here, I'm probably just going to call this WBC clock. I'm just going to call it UTC. And then down here, I'm just going to go ahead and call this local. Compile it. All right, so then here, since we've got so over here, we went ahead and if I come back to the time, I'm going to come back to the graph. Here's our source. We made it publicly available in Expose on Spawn. So now we can come into the HUD and I can set this one to UTC. And I can then set this one to say use our whatever we're storing in the local slot. And there it is. All right, so now that we've got that done, we can go ahead and drag this into a position that we want it to be in. So I'm going to go ahead and move this over to the upper right. So to do that, I'm just going to click on the vertical box and I'm going to go to anchors and I'm going to click on left shift. So that's going to set the anchor. And then I'm going to go back to anchors and I'm going to hit the left control and that's just going to move everything over. Also, I'm just going to go ahead and just adjust the size of the vertical box and we'll try and get. Let's also go ahead and move this into position. So I'm just going to go ahead and say the X position is going to be, for me, -200. So it's going to take it off the left and move it this 200 this way. And then Y is going to be 100 units down. I'm just going to go drag this over to there a bit, give me some room. Compile save. Let me go and say -200, just resize that a bit. Alright, there we go. It's in the right place now. Just gonna move this over a bit, make it a bit bigger maybe. Just keep moving this over so it's relative. Alright, I think that looks good. So there's label, there's text blocks. Alright, so let's just make sure everything is looking good. So let's come over to the time component again. There's the event construct, so we don't have anything on pre-construct. And that looks like it's all tied in. Labels tied in. Get text, everything is tied in, and that is on the binding. So let's go back to the designer. There's our binding. Okay, good. Alright, so now let's go ahead and get this HUD onto the player character. So to do that, I'm just going to come up here and go to third person player character, go to blueprints, open this up, and then I'm just going to go to full. We don't need this and this, I just need the on begin play. And for here, I'm just going to say create widget. And on here, we're just going to go ahead and find our HUD, which is right there. Owning player, I'm just going to say get player controller, and I'm just going to go park that in there. And then here, I'm just going to say output. So I'm going to say add to the viewport. And that should do it for that. So right now, hopefully, if we've done everything correctly, we should be able to, just going to move this off screen real quick, hit the play button, and there is our clock, default day. So there it is. It's kind of pulling information, but we need to go ahead and set this up. So I'm going to hit stop. And so now let's go ahead and get our clock ticking. So to do that, we just need to go into the map, and I'm under map. So I'm just going to pull this down a bit. I'm going to say open level blueprint. And that's going to open up the blueprint level for us. And then here, I'm going to find the begin play event. And I'm also, while I'm here, I'm going to find the tick event as well. Alright, so we need both of these events on the map. So the begin play event is going to allow us to set up the configuration, and then the tick event is what we're going to be piggybacking off in order to move time forward for us. Okay, so first off, let's go ahead and get the game instance again. And we'll cast this. And I will cast this to the blueprints. To the blueprint version. So I'm just going to do that. And then off here, again, I'm just going to say promote to variable. And we'll just go ahead and clean this up a little bit. And then off here, we'll just do the same as we did in the widget UI. So I'm just going to say get this, say get simulation clock. I'm going to say convert. And then if that's a good conversion, I'm then going to say promote to variable, and I'll just keep that like that. And then off here, we're going to run the set configuration. And we need to have a local. So this will set the this will reinforce the default that we're using. But in order to get the local working, we want to pass in the local. So to do that, we're just going to come back to the content drawer. We'll come into time, and here we have our configuration file. So I'm just going to go grab this and just say copy. So that's what we're going to use. Hit save, and I'm just going to put that in there. And then finally, once everything's configured, we want to put in the lock so it can accept the ticks. So here's pause timekeeping, and we're going to set that to false because we don't want to pause it. So this is the lock, and the reason why we have the lock here is because tick could start before you've finished begin play. So tick is being called on the outside, while begin play is being called on the inside. So this is being executed on the finalizer, but this is being called from from the tick event, in the engine. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that, and so by putting a lock here, we want to make sure that we can control when we want our time simulation component to accept ticks from the system. So now that we've got that done, let's just go ahead and grab our simulated clock. I'm going to do an is valid, use the macro version of it, and we'll just hook that in there. And so then if that is valid, I'm just going to put that, I'll put that up there. Bring this down a little bit. And then all we're going to do is we're going to say, actually no, I don't want simulated clock, because I want to run it off the game instance instead. So I'm just going to grab this. That's where the tick is. There we are. So as long as our game instance is valid and the time component on there is locked, we can then accept ticks, which is just delta time on delta time. Okay, so I'm going to hit compile, I'm going to hit save, and if we've done everything correctly, we should start seeing time flowing into that clock. Alright, so okay, so our configuration, this is going to be offset by 6. We've defined hours in a day as 2, so that should be a short clock, and this is 24, and we should be starting at 8. So let's see if everything has been configured correctly. So just move that off screen, hit play, and there we are, 3 days. So here, day 1, default, 0, here, 3, and as you can see, things are ticking pretty quick. And we'll let this go, and if this goes into, so this is already on hour 2, so there it is. It's just incremented the day. And now we're back on hour 1, 45 or 50. Now we're 1 hour into the day. Alright, okie doke. So that's setting up the component. Everything looks like it's working. Our time simulation and our clock definitions are working. So we call this default. So yeah, we can keep it as default for now. So the labels are being pulled correctly. Looks like everything else is looking good. So let's go ahead and finish this up with with a simple little save and loading. So to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to run these off debug keys. So I'm going to use debug key 1 for saving and debug key 2 for loading. Don't need that. Hit compile, hit save. Let's just maximize our real estate. Alright, so in order to do a save, what we're going to do is first we need to create the save game object. So I'm going to say, here we are, create save game object, and I'm going to link that into the press key. Yeah. And then off here, I'm just going to come down, and that's the object that we want. That's going to be our save game representation, and that's what we created in part 1 when we went and created our save file. So here it is, and that is represented right here. So let's go ahead and move over. So once we've gone ahead and created this, we'll go ahead and get ourselves an instance of it. So I'm going to promote this to a variable, and I'm just going to call it save game. And then within here, let's go ahead and say set the time simulation, because that's what we want to set in that file before we save it. And then from here, I'm just going to go ahead and get the, we want the clock. I'm going to say get. I'm going to run the get current UTC seconds, and I'm just going to park that in there. So that's our raw seconds, and that's the only thing that we need to save, really. is just the raw seconds to the save system. And everything else will then, you know, get retranslated when it gets rebuilt. All right, so we're going to save that, and then I'm going to then run the async save game to slot here, and the saved game I want to do is this one, so that should go in there, and then we need to give it a slot name. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create another variable, slot, and string, save, compile, and then I'm just going to say, could call this save game 1. Hit that, compile, save, do the get, hook that in there, and then if everything worked out, I'm just going to go ahead and say print string, and we'll just say game saved. All right, and then finally, what we're going to do is we want to reload it. So it's just kind of like the reverse. So we're just going to come down to the key press. We're going to say load game from slot. So again, we're just going to take that little slot variable here and park that in there. So that's the slot name that we want to load in from. And then we want to, again, cast the save game. So we'll just do that. There it is. That way we make sure that we've got the right format. All right, so now that we've got this, we should just say get time, and there it is. So in order to reload this back in, we need to do a couple of things. So off the simulated clock, we're going to run the pause timekeeping. So what we have, this will then allow us to update timekeeping through this function. Otherwise, if we don't pause it, it won't accept the data coming in. So we'll just do that. Put the reroute node, and then we will run the set current UTC. And we'll just hook that up there, and we can then hook that in there. So by setting this to true, we're going to be telling the tick event that it will no longer be able to accept delta time until we've unlocked it. So we're going to lock it, blocking the delta ticks. Then we'll go ahead and set to the new time or to whatever was saved. And then after that, we want to reset. So we'll call pause timekeeping again, and we'll keep that false this time, which will then allow us to, accept delta time again. All right, so, and then from here, I'll just say print string, and we'll just say loaded. Okay, so I'm going to hit compile, save. All right, so let's go ahead and I'm just going to move this off. We'll run this again, and hopefully we should be able to save and load. So I'm just going to run it. All right, there it is. It's ticking, going pretty fast. One hour in, I'm just going to hit there, saved game. We'll let it hit day 2, or day 4, I should say. And then if I hit the load, it's moved it back down to 3 again. Keep hitting the load key, it keeps moving it back to when I saved it. Okay. So that's going to conclude this tutorial series. If you like what I'm doing, feel free to share and like and share my videos, as well as subscribe to my channel. And I'll see you guys again in the next video. Cheers. Bye.